At this point in the story, Frank has escaped from the minimum security prison where he was sentenced for fraud. He used to be a revival preacher. And so he's hiding out, he's on the lam, he's in this abandoned cabin in Ontario with a cat named Buffalo. And this is called Nighttime. Frank was surprised how quickly the past was swept back like a beach at low tide. Snow hung on the pine limbs around his cabin. Every few days he would walk to the spring for fresh water. Buffalo would greet him at the door when he returned. The snow was too cold and deep for her. She had tried to follow him and to lead the way, but her legs would become stuck in the deep snow. But this didn't stop her from trying to go with him every time. In the nighttime, they'd sit on the sleeping bag in front of the fire, and Frank would tell Buffalo stories from his past. The winter wind would sail through their pines, and the fire burned so hot that Frank felt like his legs would go up in flame. He told Buffalo about his brother, Henry, and about growing up in Mississippi, about how they'd walk to the train station and watch the pretty girls, about how they'd traveled across the country in his old Buick LeSabre and built a following and all the people they'd met, and about all the diners they'd eaten at, all the meals they'd had, mugs of coffee, glasses of beer, pints of whiskey, packs of Camels. He told Buffalo about how he and Lucinda met in another country. Buffalo had been with him at the prison when he got the news of her death. He told Buffalo about his dad and how his dad and his dad's brother had seen the Houdini brothers. He explained how Houdini escaped from cages, chains, handcuffs, prisons. Frank stood in front of the fire, his shadow dangling against the cabin wall, and enacted Houdini's escape, the same way his father had. He told Buffalo that she was an escape artist too, but more subtle, and she was no show-off. He told Buffalo about brothers, about Cain and Abel, about how the Houdini brothers developed their act, and about how he and Henry built their revivals, about their routines, and about their tricks. He told Buffalo about fathers and sons, about Abraham and Isaac, about God and Jesus, about David and Absalom. He told her he did not know why sons were always dying, why fathers were always killing them. He told Buffalo how friends were like brothers, told Buffalo about how David and Jonathan were like brothers, about how he and Buffalo were like brothers too, even though she was a cat and a girl. He wondered if Buffalo missed the days when he would watch the sun limp across Pine Mountain and silently smoke his Camels. He hadn't even wanted a Camel since he left. That was his old self, his old life, the life that was gone. He liked telling Buffalo stories about the past and the future because they made the past and the future live in the present, and they took away the line between them, which was how Frank saw reality now anyway. He told Buffalo about mothers and how, even though she was a cat and she was smaller than him and younger, she was his mother now because she had given him his new life. She was the mother of his new self. But mostly, Frank made up stories. He told Buffalo about her former life as a buffalo, how she had wandered across the country and back many times. And that's how she knew all the old paths, how she always guided them. She remembered. He told Buffalo about her life as a bird and how she'd flown all over the world, across the ocean, and how he had been a pine tree, and Buffalo's nest had been in his branches, and how they had taken care of each other. Most nights, he would circle back to their life as a bird and a tree and tell a new variant, a new side story, a new adventure. Frank told Buffalo that he thought in their next life they would be a bird and a tree again, and they would find each other, and she could build her nest with his pine needles, and she could raise her family in the nest, safe in his branches, and he would keep the wind and the rain and the snow from her when she slept, and she would make him feel not so alone. A tree can be very alone, especially a pine. A pine is the loneliest tree in the world. He asked Buffalo what kind of a bird she would like to be. She looked at him like he was an idiot, which of course he was, and he was certain she wished he was back to his silent, camel-smoking self. Frank told Buffalo the reason she chased birds was because those birds had been her enemies when she was a bird. And he invented generations long rivalries and grievances similar to the Hatfields and McCoys or the Montagues and Capulets. And circling back to their next life again, he told her that he would be a white pine so that she would recognize him and know his pine needle scent. He told her that he thought she would be a dove because doves are gray like her and fluffy and chubby, and so he would recognize her too. Buffalo laid against his leg, ignoring him, looking at the fire. Did you know I was a fraud, Buffalo? She turned and looked up at him. To him, her expression seemed to say, Are you kidding me? How could I not know? Everybody knows that. When Buffalo looked away, back to the fire, Frank would slap the rope that hung from the ceiling hatch and set it sailing. Buffalo would notice the rope moving and crouch down, hunting it, pouncing at the rope, catching it in her paws and mouth.